Chapter 801 Giant Beast of the Ice Sea. In the blink of an eye, more than half a month had passed. The voyage had taken far longer than expected, which made Zhang Yi couldn't help but feel a little depressed. Voyaging was a very boring thing, being stuck on a swaying icebreaker, facing the same people and scenes every day. Although it was pretty much the same when they were in the shelter. But on land there would be a sense of solidity, and he'd be able to get out and about from time to time. But on the ice sea, leaving the ship was simply impossible. It wasn't like Zhang Yi couldn't land while passing through land. However, with his steady character, this approach was obviously inappropriate. For one thing, the ship didn't need any supplies, the resources in his hands were already enough. Secondly, the land was rarely accessible for supplies, and was instead filled with bandits and pirates. While transiting a few small countries, the Golden Front experienced another incident of robbery. Zhang Yi's approach was also very decisive, cutting off the routes. Basically, none of the pirates and land gangs that he met could survive. But there was one thing that was a bit more troublesome: their ship had been exposed to the vision of Colombian Navy's ocean-going forces. After all, as the world's #1 naval power, Colombia's satellite surveillance system was no less than Huashu Kingdom's nebula. Moreover, Zhang Yi and the others had not used military shielding instruments in order not to alert the snakes. This made their movements extraordinarily obvious. This was something that Zhu Jing had discussed with Zhang Yi and Zhu Lark. Since their banner was evacuation, there was no need to cover it up. After all, the core of the mission was a secret in someone's hands. Moreover, Colombia's oceanic naval forces were not lacking in supplies, and their own sun would guarantee their supplies. So, basically, there was no need to worry about the Colombian oceanic forces making a move against Zhang Yi and the others. 39th day of sea voyage. Zhang Yi and his group encountered an extremely strange sight at sea. On this day, Zhang Yi was discussing calligraphy with Zhou Qi in the cabin. Zhang Yi personally usually liked cursive writing more, and from time to time, he would use it to cultivate his temperament. Suddenly, the ship shook violently, and the shaking continued. Old Tian urgently came over to bang bang bang. Slamming the door, that urgent look, unprecedented. Seeing this, Zhang Yi could only finish cleaning his desk and let Zhou Qi organize his clothes. Then he went over to open the door for old Tian. "What's going on?" Panicking. "What's it like?" Zhang Yi said with a frown. But old Tian and the two sailors behind him said to Zhang Yi with a panicked look on their faces, "Mr. Zhang Yi, we met a sea monster." Zhang Yi and Zhou Qi were surprised in unison. Sea monster? This day had finally come. From the moment they left the sea, Zhang Yi and Zhou Qi had imagined in their hearts that they would meet a sea monster in the middle of the ocean. There was some worry, yet there were still some emotions of anticipation in it. When they were offshore, they had once encountered a mutated whale, but that whale was only large in size and did not show too much destructive power. Zhang Yi analyzed that it might have been driven into the offshore from the deep sea region. It was because of the emergence of a true overlord in the middle of the deep sea that caused it to be afraid of being turned into food and fled to the less dangerous offshore. It was just that it never expected that it didn't die at the hands of a marine creature, but instead died at the hands of a four-legged beast on land. There were times when the one who took you out might not be a peer, and there was also the possibility that it was playing a cross-border game. Zhang Yi came back to his senses and pressed his right hand on the wrist bracelet, and the black battle suit was automatically put on his body. "Wait for me for a moment." He closed the door and began to take out his battle suit to change into it. And Zhou Qi was not idle either, and similarly began to change her clothes. The combat suit of the investigation team was exchanged by Zhang Yi. He saved Zhu Jing and drove away the reincarnation squad, and the huge points he received were used to exchange for high-tech armaments. At least everyone in the family had a set, including Auntie Zhou Haimei, who would only cook at home the whole day as well as help Uncle Yu with his stress. Only after Zhang Yi was fully dressed did he open the door and came to the deck with Zhou Qi. The Golden Front was rocking so much that all the sailors on the deck had to tie safety ropes around their waists. The storm was raging outside, and before their eyes was a gray haze that blurred their vision. At the end of the sea in the distance, the waves rolled, as if there was something huge tossing and turning, and from time to time there were horrible roars coming from the ears, as if they were deep-sea deities from the distant past. Zhu Lark blocked the exit of the cabin, looking scared, yet somewhat wanting to go and watch the fun. Zhang Yi yanked her to the side. "You two stay here, don't run outside. Be careful of being knocked over into the sea by the waves." Zhu Lark was somewhat touched in her heart. Zhang Yi would actually care about her. But in reality, Zhang Yi just felt that if she died, it would be hard to explain to Zhu Zheng's end. The deck was too shaky, so Zhang Yi directly opened the end, allowing his body to levitate above the gold-ent front. Now, he could finally see the full picture of the sea monster that old Tian was talking about. Roughly 20 or so nautical miles away from the gold-ent front, the sea water had been dyed a large blood color. It was not one sea monster, but many heads. Literally, Zhang Yi saw many heads. Otherwise, he would not have been able to tell the number of sea monsters. In the middle of the ice-blue ocean, the sea monsters were too huge, and tightly by what he saw, he could tell that they were all 50 meters upwards. Zhang Yi continued to soar into the air, trying to see more clearly. After he flew thousands of meters into the air, he finally got a good look. 1, 2, 5, a total of 5 sea monsters. 4 huge sharks were surrounding a sea serpent or moray eel-looking monster. Those sharks had also undergone mutations, and it was unknown if they had once lived in Neon, so they looked extraordinarily hideous and twisted. Some sharks had eyes all over their heads, others had 2 heads, and Zhang Yi even saw a shark with human-like arms. They frantically bit the giant sea snake in front of them. The reason why it was a sea snake was because it had a long and narrow body that was more than 100 meters long and covered with black scales. Only on its head was a huge sharp horn, and on its back were hundreds of black bumps larger than a shark's dorsal fin. The huge body rose and fell on the surface of the sea, as huge and appalling as rolling hills. Facing the siege of the 4 mutated sharks, its head was raised high from the surface of the water, and its body continuously swept across the sea, with a large amount of scales falling into the sea, and blood staining a dozen or so kilometers of the sea. Its huge sharp horn suddenly emitted a strong purple light, and finally it even ejected a beam of light that swept towards the 4 sharks around it. Immediately, one of the sharks was directly pierced through by this beam of light, and sank to the bottom of the sea after screaming miserably. Chapter 802, Don't Come to the Edge. The battle between the sea monsters made Zhang Yi's heart skip a beat as he watched. The sharks were desperately tearing into the sea snake's body, which was long and was gnawed and bruised, revealing the skeleton inside. However, it was equally terrifying. After killing a shark with the laser on its head, the huge head leaned back with force and then viciously stabbed into the back of a shark. Like a sword slicing through pork, pfft. As if a waterfall of blood had opened up, shark blood gushed out from the sky. Zhang Yi couldn't help but swallow his saliva, and after he regained his senses, he immediately returned to the deck. "March with full force and leave this area," Zhang Yi said to old Tian. That sea monster was too terrifying, completely not comparable to the mutated whales Zhang Yi had encountered before. The 4 sharks alone were frightening in size and destructive power, and they were feared to be above the Tianlong pirates Captain Canuta that he had encountered before. If the sea monsters found out about their ship and came to attack, it was a big trouble for Zhang Yi. When old Tian heard this, he also knew that the situation was dangerous and hurriedly yelled and ordered the crew to turn on full power and set off in the opposite direction of the sea monsters. The gold-ent front was far away from the sea, but the sound of the sea monster hissing came to their ears from time to time. Even Zhang Yi looked back and saw thunder in the air constantly landing and splitting in the middle of that sea. 10 minutes later, the ship drove out dozens of nautical miles, and everything around them returned to calm. However, Zhang Yi always felt that the air was filled with the smell of blood. What a thrilling battle! The dangers in the depths of the ocean can be much scarier than on land. Zhang Yi stood on the deck and let out such a feeling in his heart. "Something's wrong, Chief, something's very wrong," old Tian suddenly said to Zhang Yi. "HM? What's wrong?" Zhang Yi inquired. Old Tian lowered his head and looked at the surface of the sea. The seawater was crimson and blood-stained. Marine creatures are extremely sensitive to the smell of blood, and as a matter of fact, with such a strong smell of blood here, there should be schools of fish converging over. But why is there not a single fish to be seen around here? When Zhang Yi heard this, an idea surfaced in his mind. And at the same time, his passive ability was unleashed. Time Echo, one of the abilities that Zhang Yi had awakened after absorbing Phoenix Ren, Mayumi Takeuchi and Kanuda. Time-based ability, passive skill. When Zhang Yi was about to be attacked, an early warning was given. Below. Zhang Yi's gaze looked down at her feet, below the surface of the sea to be exact, and a feeling of being targeted by a ferocious beast instantly struck her heart. Without hesitation, Zhang Yi attached the ability of Sentinel to the entire ship, then opened the Sublime Gate underneath the ship. Boom! Not long after he completed this wave of maneuvers, the seawater in the surrounding waters suddenly turned wildly. If one were to look down from a high altitude, one could notice a huge whirlpool that began to form with the area where the Golden Front was centered. It was a whirlpool with a radius of thousands of meters. And in the depths of the whirlpool, a huge black dorsal fin loomed amongst the crests of the waves. It was that sea serpent. Zhang Yi recognized it. It was the giant sea serpent that had just been fighting off the 4 mutated sharks. Unexpectedly, it had noticed the human in this direction and chased after it. Perhaps, it was noticing Zhang Yi, a human with a difference. Zhang Yi propped up the Golden Front as the human lay on the railing and looked at the deep sea. The sea serpent's huge eyes were blood red and stared at him dead on. As expected, it was here for Zhang Yi. Those blood-colored pupils were full of bloody killing, and Zhang Yi could be sure that its eyes were twice as big as Zhang Yi's entire body. Although he didn't know if it could understand human language, Zhang Yi still used his speaker to amplify his voice and shouted, "We are not your enemies, just passing through." The sea monster simply ignored Zhang Yi's explanation as it revealed its head from the ocean, its huge pointed horn aimed at Zhang Yi before shooting out a purple light. Zhang Yi's pupils shrank and he immediately opened the second Sublime Gate to block in front of him. A steady stream of lasers shot into the interior of the Gate of Dimensions for half a minute before stopping. The intensity of this energy was very high, and the oppressive force it brought to Zhang Yi was definitely no less than that of a captain-level inhuman. And in the middle of the ocean, its home ground, it could even potentially wipe out an investigation team. If today, the one who appeared here was not Zhang Yi, but Deng Shintong or Bian Zhenwu, it was almost a certain death. This was because the sea monster could slaughter them at will by simply destroying their ships. No wonder Zhu Jing insisted that I do this mission. Zhang Yi took a deep breath. They were calling me. The sea monster's attack didn't work, which made it become much more alert. However, the huge body was still hovering in the ocean, and the huge figure that was constantly squirming brought an oppressive force that was hard to describe. But Zhang Yi was also angered. "Old me didn't provoke you, what are you pretending with me?" The laser that had been absorbed into the room was reversed by his vector and returned as is. At this moment, looking at its attack being bounced back, a bewildered look appeared in the sea monster's eyes. However, it also experienced the power of its own attack. Originally, after a great battle, its body was bruised and battered, and then when it was shot in the torso by the laser, it immediately let out an incomparably terrifying roar. Scales and flesh and blood were flying, and one could even see the charred and blackened skeleton inside. As for Zhang Yi's right hand, the power of the void had already begun to condense, ready to be transformed into a fatal strike to completely take its life. The sea monster finally realized that the strength of the man in front of it was capable of killing it. It roared in rage and without hesitation, its head plunged into the water and swam towards the deep sea. Void Spear. The condensation of unstable dark matter was completed, extending a spear over 2 meters long. Precision shot. Many remnants appeared in Zhang Yi's eyes, and eventually, these remnants gradually merged into one. It turned out that the precision shot ability was Zhang Yi's earliest temporal ability, which could also be said to be the prototype of Time Echo. It could predict the trajectory of the opponent's actions. and after being locked by Time Echo, there was no escape. The void spear came out of his hand and didn't enter the sea. The seawater in its route split directly as if it had met a natural enemy. Millions of tons of seawater gave way to a cylindrical channel for it, and chased after the sea monster straight away. Rumble. Moments later, the seawater rumbled into the middle of that huge channel, drowning out all existence. But soon, bright red and even somewhat dark blood rolled out from below. Zhang Yi frowned. Ever since he had raised his strength, the power of the Void Spear had also received a huge boost, such as being able to accomplish a point-killing change from face to point. But even so, it was unknown if he could finish off this super-large sea monster with a single strike. After all, this was the ocean, its domain, and it was impossible for Zhang Yi to go after it. Get the hell away from me. Or else next time, I will definitely kill you. Chapter 803 Rockflow Island. Calmness returned to the sea, only that blood stained the surrounding dozens of miles of sea, looking extremely terrifying and bizarre. On Old Tion's side, the radar showed that there were no more large creatures present in the vicinity. Zhang Yi inquired, "How far away is Rockflow Island?" Old Tion replied, "There are still more than 1,000 nautical miles, and at the current speed, we can reach our destination in 3 days. Have someone observe in the radar room at all times. There is a chance that the sea monster is not dead," Zhang Yi reminded. Old Tion could not help but swallow his saliva. If he was targeted by such a monster, sailing on top of the sea would require him to be wary every day. Seeing his panicked look, Zhang Yi said indifferently, "It was seriously injured and must be looking for a place to heal now. It's unlikely to come back to harass us in a short period of time. Let's leave here immediately after picking up the people. The return voyage should be faster than when they came, and as long as they return to land, they wouldn't need to worry about the sea monster." Old Tion nodded his head in agreement and went back to the helm. When Zhang Yi returned to the cabin, Zhu Lark ran over and inquired, "How is that sea monster? Did you kill it?" Zhang Yi said, "It was seriously injured and hid inside the deep sea. It won't affect us for the time being." Zhu Lark looked worried. "It didn't die, what if it stares at us afterward?" Zhang Yi said, "How the hell do I know? Let's talk about it when the time comes." Anyway, the worst scenario was that the ship was destroyed and he could escape with Jokir. As for the others, he could only say that he would do his best. Of course, the likelihood of such a situation occurring was relatively low. With him here, the probability of this monster trying to destroy the Gold Ent front was approximately equal to 0. There are still about 3 days to go before we reach Rockflow Island. Zhang Yi said to Zhu Lark, "Contact the people over there." Zhu Lark's eyes slowly brightened. Finally, she could go ashore. She was about to suffocate after being at sea for over a month. The corners of her mouth all lifted up, and a touch of pride surfaced on her face. The communication channel with the people of Rockflow Island was placed in her hands by Zhu Zheng. Perhaps Zhu Zheng was worried about Zhang Yi completely ignoring Zhu Lark. "All right then, come to my room and we'll slowly communicate with the people there." She looked at Zhang Yi's face with a smiling face. "Whatever." Zhang Yi was unimpressed and followed her to her room. Zhu Lark's room was relatively well decorated and was considered the first-class cabin of the entire ship, second only to Zhang Yi and Jokir's. Zhang Yi directly sat on a chair after entering the room. Zhu Lark reached out and took out a case from inside the closet, which was her communication instrument. She unfolded the instrument on the floor and began to contact the people on Rockflow Island. The process was somewhat lengthy. Zhu Lark tried several times, but she did not receive any response. Zhang Yi frowned. "What's going on? Could there be an accident?" They had been sailing on the sea for more than a month, and in the middle of the end times, that time was enough to make many things change. It was possible that those people on Rockflow Island had died. Zhu Lark frowned slightly. "I'll try again." She didn't give up, and her expression was still relatively focused when she was working. After a few minutes, the communicator picked up the signal. "Got it." Her eyes lit up. "Hello, is this Snow Wolf?" Snow Wolf, was the code name of the man from Rockflow Island. It wasn't that the Jiangnan region didn't know his information, but the use of a code name when communicating could avoid being bugged. Zhang Yi walked over and listened to the voice on the other end. It was a young man's voice with fatigue and nervousness and excitement. "I'm Snow Wolf, is it the old home? Have you guys come? We're in great danger here, more than half of our group is dead. It's almost impossible to hold on." Zhu Lark said calmly, "Don't be nervous, we will arrive in about 3 days." Zhu Lark said as he operated the instrument in his hand. This instrument was connected to the nebula system and could directly observe the entirety of Rockflow Island. Zhu Lark was picking a suitable landing site. "What is your current location?" "We will land in an area close to you. In the direction of the northwest, there is." The voice hesitated for a moment and continued, "There is a cliff, and below it was a secret cave. That's where we are." Zhu Lark left to zoom in on the map of that area. The perimeter of Rockflow Island was covered by a layer of white ice, which allowed some of the otherwise steep cliffs to be walked over. The place where Snow Wolf and the others were hiding was underneath one of the cliffs, and if it wasn't viewed through the satellite map, it would really be hard to find. Zhang Yi went over and inquired, "Is there any danger on the island?" The Snow Wolf said in a weak voice, "There are a lot of people on the island, it wasn't just us. There are the Aborigines, and those who fled in the past later. There's a volcano on the island, and geothermal heat, so it feeds a lot of people. But there wasn't enough food. Some people started killing to stay alive. Not many people on the island were frozen to death, they all starved to death and died of disease, but the most were killed and made into food." Zhu Lark's expression was very heavy. She quickly comforted, "You don't have to be afraid, we came here this time to bring you all home. We will definitely protect your safety." Zhang Yi came over and continued to ask, "Are there any Inhumans? That is, mutated humans, or creatures with powerful abilities? Are there any armed organizations?" The Snow Wolf replied, "There are armed organizations, which were local gangs. However, it is true that some people have suddenly generated very powerful forces." After confirming that there were no professional forces, Zhang Yi's mood relaxed quite a bit. As for the inhuman aspect, there was no need to worry too much. A small Rockflow Island did not have the conditions to give birth to powerful Inhumans. If it did, Snow Wolf would not have had the chance to ask for help from the Jiangnan region, and this place would have been ruled by him long ago. He patted Zhu Lark's shoulder, signaling her to continue talking to Snow Wolf while Zhang Yi had finished asking his own questions. He didn't care about the rest and was only responsible for coming over to pick up the people. Zhang Yi left Zhu Lark's room, then went to the control room and called for Old Tian. "Old Tian, we will be arriving at our destination soon. You tell everyone to prepare their weapons and equipment, bulletproof vests must be worn. Also pay attention to observing the surrounding waters and tell me the first time if there is any movement." Out of his cautious character, Zhang Yi would not trust any stranger. So it had to be properly prepared for his heart to be solid. Was, Mr. Zhang. 3 days later, the Golden Front arrived at Rockflow Island without any surprises. This island located in the middle of the ocean, close to the equator, was an undersea volcano formed by eruption. And it erupted every 37 years, it was an active volcano turned into an island. As a result, Rockflow Island has a huge amount of geothermal energy underneath. In the 1950s, humans were able to control the eruption of Rockflow Island and minimize the damage. Rockflow Island was also developed into a tourist attraction, especially the local hot springs were very famous. After the end of the world, more than 5,000 people came here to escape from the disaster. Together with the local Aborigines and the tourism industry, the total population was more than 20,000. These were the basic intelligence of Rockflow Island. Chapter 804, You're Going to Die. Around 9:30 in the morning, a piercingly cold wind blew from the northwest towards the edge of the equator. As the region with the highest temperatures on the planet, the real-time temperature here was now around -20 degrees. The Golden Front approached Rock Flow Island from the surface, and as far as the eye could see, it was snow-covered, and the offshore area had condensed into a large sheet of ice. As the most advanced icebreaker at the moment, the Golden Front naturally did not need to dock at the offshore periphery. The huge and heavy hull directly crushed the ice and arrived at the edge of Rock Flow Island. According to the communication with the Snow Wolf, it came to the northwest bearing of Rock Flow Island and found a port of call here. Zhang Yi told everyone to get geared up and ready to go, then asked Zhu Lark to contact the man codenamed Snow Wolf. Zhu Lark immediately used his communicator to make contact with Snow Wolf. On the other hand, Zhang Yi was assigning manpower, a total of 16 crew members, 10 of whom stayed on the ship. He himself was planning to bring 6 crew members ashore. Soon after, Zhu Lark made contact with Snow Wolf. "They're coming over soon," Zhu Lark said to Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi nodded and then had the sailors lower the gangway with the intention of going ashore. "That substance known as the Source of God is on this island?" Zhang Yi looked at the snow-covered island in front of him and thought curiously in his heart. That mysterious substance that could enhance the strength of an inhuman and even allow Zhang Yi to break through the limitations of the genetic lock and reach the realm of Epsilon, Zhang Yi was still very curious. If he could obtain it, that would naturally be the best. Although he wasn't particularly interested in improving his strength, in the end times, the only way to live well was to have a strong enough capital. Shou Qi and Zhu Lark followed Zhang Yi's side, both of them wearing white combat uniforms. "It is said that the hot springs here are very good," Shou Qi said with a smile beside Zhang Yi. "If it's possible, I would like to take a dip for a while later." More than half a month of sailing was too exhausting. Now that it was easy to be able to set foot on land, and having heard that this place was rich in geothermal energy, it was natural that people could not help but want to experience it. The hot springs was packed with many minerals, it's very beneficial to the body. Shou Qi put one hand on Zhang Yi's shoulder and said with a smiling face. She did not put her arm around Zhang Yi. This was because Zhang Yi, who was in a state of alert, hated it when people put their arms around him. Seeing this, Zhu Lark could not help but feel some jealousy in her heart. The relationship between her and Zhang Yi had not made much of a breakthrough after the long sea voyage. Zhang Yi always treated her with respect and drew the line from the very beginning. She never understood what she was missing out on. Just as Zhang Yi and the others were observing the condition of Rock Flow Island and discussing about the hot spring bath, Zhang Yi suddenly felt alarmed. "Watch out!" He unfolded the domain of at the first moment, protecting the few people around him. In the next instant, gunshots could be heard in his ears. In the snowy bushes in the distance, silhouettes were longing, and they suddenly emerged from the snow before they started firing fiercely at Zhang Yi and the others. However, all of these bullets were swallowed up by the alien space. Sneak attack? But they were all just ordinary bullets, not inhumans. Zhang Yi quickly reacted. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. These people must be the dangers on the island that Snow Wolf had mentioned before. It couldn't be helped that the Golden Front's arrival on Rock Flow Island was too conspicuous, and it must have attracted the attention of some people. They were trying to kill and seize the ship. "Go!" Zhang Yi waved his hand and all the bullets shot back the same way. The gunmen hidden in the snowy bushes were all penetrated by their bullets and were killed or injured. Screams and shrieks rang out all over the island. Zhang Yi's ears heard angry curses. The people who had come were one of the now famous violent organizations on Rock Flow Island, and the leader was named Kun Bai, from the small country of Nanyang. After their people discovered the Golden Front, they immediately ambushed the surrounding area, intending to kill and seize the ship. However, they did not expect that the stubble would be so hard. Kun Bai's eyes stared at the group of people wearing white combat uniforms. Just by the dress code, he could tell that those people were not ordinary. But instead of being stuck on this island waiting for death, it is better to put up a fight. Maybe there is still a way to live. "Little ones, give me a charge." With a rifle in his hand, Kun Bai stood up and shot at Zhang Yi and the others. It was all minions. Zhang Yi didn't bother to waste time, pulling out 2 golden sand eagles, the guns flattened out, and the ability to precision shot locked onto the dozens of enemies hundreds of meters away. The sound of gunshots rang out like firecrackers, and with every shot fired by Zhang Yi, an enemy was killed by a headshot. And the crew were not idle either, they were all well-trained sailors. Putting down their guns was a good sailor, picking them up was a good soldier. Everyone cupped their guns and began to counterattack. Originally, the enemy was bright and we were dark. Zhang Yi and the others stood in the harbor without cover and were easily surrounded and annihilated. However, for one thing, Zhang Yi possessed the ability to devour bullets, and for another, to put it bluntly, even if Zhang Yi and the others stood there and let the other side shoot. Just with the combat uniforms they were wearing, it was not something that this group of refugees could penetrate with the backward and broken guns in their hands. In less than a minute, the incoming villains were almost all wiped out. Even if they reacted to the situation and wanted to run away, they definitely could not dodge the bullets fired by Zhang Yi. The leader of this organization, Kun Bai, also did not expect the enemy to be so powerful. "We can only fight for our lives. I'll show you how powerful I am." Kun Bai's body suddenly twisted up and turned into a monstrous creature covered in white bone spines like a giant centipede. He then plunged straight into the snow with a jerk, charging towards Zhang Yi and the others from underneath the layer of ice and snow. Soon, Zhang Yi frowned, sensing the impending attack from underground. Unmoved, he simply took out his holy judgment, then backhanded a sword and ruthlessly plunged it under the snow. Snort! A stream of blood gushed out directly from the ground, followed by a heart-rending scream. With a single push, Zhang Yi picked Kun Bai's body to fly out. Inhuman, probably only beta level. Kun Bai's appearance startled both Zhou Qi and Zhu Lark. The women instinctively felt fear of such bugs. Especially if it was a large centipede that was nearly 2 meters long, who wouldn't be scared in their heart when they saw it? It was only people like Zhang Yi who had killed countless people and had long been numb to strange sights. "Who are you people? Why are you attacking us?" Zhang Yi asked with a smile, with a kind of condescending teasing. If anyone in the Jiangnan region knew that a beta-level inhuman would dare to sneak attack, it would definitely make everyone laugh their asses off. "Spare me. I won't dare anymore, I know I'm wrong." Kun Bai twisted on the tip of the sword, wailing and begging for mercy. Zhang Yi suddenly lost interest in him as it looked like he was nothing more than a useless scaredy cat. "No, you just know you're going to die." Zhang Yi threw him to the ground with a force in his hand, followed by Zhang Yi following him. Kun Bai twisted his body and still wanted to escape, but he was penetrated by Zhang Yi's another sword with force through his body. Pooh! Blood splashed out once again. "I heard that centipedes were hard to kill." Zhang Yi stabbed down his long body from head to tail, stabbing down again and again, not stopping until he almost split his body into 2 halves. Chapter 805 Snow Wolf. As soon as Zhang Yi and the others came ashore, they were attacked by the armed organization on Rock Flow Island, which proved that Zhang Yi was right to be cautious. If the person who came today was not him, but an ordinary rescue team, they were afraid that they would have died under the random gunfire. The gunshots should have attracted the attention of quite a few people. Zhou Qi said to Zhang Yi, "It doesn't matter, it looks like there aren't any experts on this island." Zhang Yi said indifferently. The fact that this kind of beta-level inhuman dared to attack them blatantly meant that even if there were inhuman on this island, their level was not much higher. It was no wonder, after all, Rock Flow Island could be said to be isolated from the world nowadays. I'm afraid that after slightly awakening a little bit of their alien ability, they thought they were invincible. Just at this time, one of the crew members suddenly raised his gun and shouted into the distance, "Who is it? Hurry up and come out. Don't shoot, don't shoot. I was from Huashu Kingdom." A man came from the distance with his hands up. He was wearing a white down jacket, and his head was covered by a hat so that only half of his face could be seen, but he didn't seem to be very old. "Were you the rescue team sent by Huashu Kingdom?" the man asked with a cautious face as he walked over. Zhang Yi and Zhu Lark glanced at each other and asked him, "You were the Snow Wolf?" The man froze for a moment, and then tears actually flowed from among his dry eyes. You were the people from the old country? Zhang Yi nodded. That's right, it was us. He unexpectedly covered his eyes on the spot and fell to his knees, whimpering and crying. Great, you guys are finally here, great, great. He was a bit incoherent and kept mumbling great. Zhang Yi could understand his feelings. In such an isolated place with no food and surrounded by murderous villains, this kind of despair was not something that normal people could experience. Zhu Lark was heartbroken when she saw the man's appearance and hurriedly went over to help him up. After some questioning, Zhang Yi realized the man's identity. His name was Li Zhongyu and he was a Chinese descendant whose father's generation had immigrated to Star Island in the last century. The main language of Star Island was Mandarin, so Li Zhongyu was also fluent in Mandarin. He works as a history teacher at a school on Star Island. He originally came to Rockflow Island because of a trip organized by the school. As a result, the cold wave that suddenly descended trapped them here. Don't worry, we were here to bring you home. Zhu Lark was filled with heartache as she listened to Li Zhongyu's narration. According to Li Zhongyu, after the arrival of the end times, this island had also slowly turned into a hell on earth. More than half of their team had already died, and most of them had become food for the villainous organization. Zhang Yi listened to Li Zhongyu's words, but his heart did not fluctuate much. Zhang Yi had seen too much of this kind of thing in Tianhai City to be considered as anything. At the very least, compared to those who died tragically in Tianhai City, Li Zhongyu and the others were much happier. At least they were still alive. And seeing Zhu Lark's compassionate appearance, Zhang Yi frowned. They had only come to bring Li Zhongyu back, but they would not give to excess promises. The prerequisite was to confirm that the information that Li Zhongyu had passed on to Blizzard City was true. Hey, Li Zhongyu. Zhang Yi walked up to him and stared at him with a cold expression. Where's that thing you mentioned? Is it on your body? Li Zhongyu's heart was alerted, and after he hesitated for a while, he slowly nodded his head. I don't have the item on me. As long as you take us away, I will definitely give you the item as promised. Moreover, that thing was not obtained from Rockflow Island. If you guys want to know where that place is, save our lives first. Not obtained from Rockflow Island? Zhang Yi frowned slightly, which meant that the mission wasn't over yet, was it? Zhang Yi smiled faintly. Very good, very smart. Li Zhongyu's approach was cautious, making Zhang Yi surprisingly appreciate him a little. Before confirming that he had gotten enough benefits, he would never hand over the bottom card in his hand. How many of you are still alive? Zhang Yi asked indifferently. Li Zhongyu replied, there are still more than 30 people. This amount was completely acceptable to Zhang Yi. It was much less than what he had expected. Very well, I can take you all back. In front of Zhu Lark, Zhang Yi did not ask any more questions about the mysterious stone. Anyway, after getting on the boat, he had plenty of time to ask questions slowly. Where are your people? Zhang Yi looked around and did not find anyone else around. Li Zhongyu took a deep breath and hurriedly reached out to point to the distance. They are all hiding in the caves. I heard gunshots and came over to check the situation. Zhang Yi said, take us over to take a look. He smiled. It looks like there are still quite a few people on this island. We have to leave without delay. The sound of the gunshot was so loud that it could be heard throughout the entire island. Naturally, it also attracted the prying eyes of some people. Zhang Yi, however, did not care about the others. He was only here to complete the mission, and the deaths and lives of the others had nothing to do with him. Li Zhongyu hurriedly led the way for Zhang Yi, and they crossed a beach to the bottom of the cliff. Li Zhongyu came to a pile of messy rocks, reached out and pointed there. We've been staying here the whole time. Move the rocks and you can enter. I'm sorry to trouble you guys for a little help. Zhu Lark smiled and nodded. There's nothing wrong with being cautious, you're smart. She looked at the crew next to her. You guys help move the rocks away. Slow. Zhang Yi, however, reached out to stop them. He looked at Li Zhongyu with a slightly playful expression. You can't do it yourself? Li Zhongyu's expression was stunned, and his demeanor was somewhat unnatural as he smiled. Seeing this, Zhu Lark frowned and criticized Zhang Yi. "Mr. Zhang, what time is it, and you're still so mean? They've all suffered so much on the island, is it hard to just ask your people to help move some rocks?" Zhang Yi ignored Zhu Lark and instead stretched out the index finger of his right hand to point at Li Zhongyu. He said with a smirk, "Would someone who dares to come out alone to explore the situation when the outside world is raining gunfire be an ordinary person? Am I right, Snow Wolf? You, too, were an ability person." Zhang Yi slowly opened his eyes and said in a somewhat cold voice, "You are very cautious, which I appreciate. But your strength is insignificant in my eyes. So don't hide yourself unnecessarily, that will only make me feel bored. Understand?" When Li Zhongyu heard this, a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I didn't intend to hide anything." After saying that, in front of the crowd, his body began to change visibly. It began to grow a body full of white hair, his body grew larger, and he grew sharp teeth and claws. A few moments later, he turned into a white snow wolf over 2 meters tall. A beastman-type ability user. "I knew it would be like this. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to survive on this island," Zhang Yi said. He could see that it was just a beta-level ability user, and didn't have much potential, let alone killing power. In a real fight, he was afraid that even a fully armed crew member would have a chance to kill him. "It was just enough to defend myself, even so, I still had to witness many people around me die," Li Zhongyu said with some sorrow. With only his strength alone, he could not protect everyone around him. After all, if everyone wanted to stay alive, they had to get food, fuel. These, on Rockflow Island, were important supplies that could make people put their lives on the line to fight.